Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now today I'm honoured to be speaking with Academy Manager and Soccer Coach Michael Hamilton. Michael, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Hi Dan, thank you for having me.
No worries at all, mate. Really excited to be speaking with you today. And just to clarify, you are Academy Manager of AFC Wimbledon, which means a lot to me, mate, because I grew up a Spurs supporter. However, I did have a period of time in the late 80s. This is how disloyal I am to Spurs. I did have a period of time in the late 80s actually supporting Wimbledon, the old Wimbledon team, when they were in what was the old First Division and the FA Cup. And so Plough Lane, Wimbledon, I think it means a lot to tennis fans, but not always abroad to football and soccer fans. So it'll be a really cool conversation for me today, mate, to hear all about what you're doing. But to get us started, Michael, why don't you introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
My name's Michael Hamilton. I'm currently Academy Manager at AFC Wimbledon. I've been in my role now since early September. So you're talking about 5 months now, around 5 months. Previous to that, I was Academy Head of Coaching for just over 2 years. And previous to that, I was lead youth phase, which basically means in academy football, I looked after the under-13s, the under-16s section of the academy. So all in all, I've been at AFC Wimbledon since 2008, and I've been pretty much present for most of its journey. I've been part of the academy when the academy wasn't even an academy, when it was still a quite large grassroots setup. And I've seen this evolve. So for me to become academy manager a few months ago was, kind of like the icing on the cake for me. It came out of the blue. The opportunity came out of the blue, but it's something that I'm enjoying at the moment.
Well, that's awesome, mate, and I'm keen to talk about some of the stuff you guys are doing because I've been really interested in some of the coaching processes you guys are engaged in. But I do think for our global audience, it would be, I don't know if you're a historian about Wimbledon Football Club and AFC Wimbledon, but as you said, it's an interesting rise, and as you say, you were involved with the academy when it wasn't necessarily or couldn't be described as an academy. So if you can you give us a sort of a potted biography of AFC Wimbledon and maybe Wimbledon before that, and we can take things from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Wimbledon Football Club, I can't remember the year they founded, but they started off in the lower echelons of professional football and progressed through the leagues, and they made it to the Premier League in the 90s, and they stayed in the Premier League. They're quite an established Premier League side. I'm an Arsenal fan, so I don't know how this conversation's going to go, Dan. You've been a Spurs fan, but I'm an Arsenal fan. And I remember Wimbledon coming to Highbury and beating Arsenal 3-2, I believe it was. Vinnie Jones got a goal. And they were an established Premiership side. I suppose if you had to compare them to a modern side, I suppose like a Burnley. In their highest place season, they finished 5th. And in the late 1990s, early 2000s, the club they changed ownership a couple of times. And in 2002, I believe it is, an owner came in and decided to relocate the club to Milton Keynes. So taking not just the club, but the league position and everything else. So that's the beginning of Milton Keynes Dons, which, I'll probably get crucified for mentioning them. And Wimbledon, as it was known, they were taking out the league, and, the football club were taking out Wimbledon. So the fans, being the fans that they are, said, that's not going to happen. And they decided to set up their own football club, which was AFC Wimbledon, and started in the highest possible league they could in non-league football. So that was the birth of AFC Wimbledon in 2002. And they smashed all the leagues, if I'm completely honest. They were the biggest non-league side around, and kind of like everyone's favourite second club due to the story. And in 2011, it would have been 2011, they got to the playoff final in the conference where they played Luton, and this was to regain their league position. And they beat Luton on penalties in 2011 and were in League Two for a few years, and in 2016 got to the League Two playoff and have now been in League One ever since. So when the fans first formed the club, the three things that they wanted was their own football club, a league position, which they've now got two, and the third thing is that they want their ground back. Back where it was. You mentioned the old Plough Lane. They're trying to build the new Plough Lane at the moment, and we're on the verge of doing that. So the three targets that the fans set out when they formed the club are they're on the verge of being achieved.
It's an incredible story, and to fill that in a touch bit more, I mean, I'm certainly no expert here, certainly no historian about Wimbledon and AFC Wimbledon, but they were in the old First Division prior to the Premier League, so that would have been in the sort of mid to late 80s, and they got to the FA Cup final, the world's biggest cup competition, in 1987, and famously beat Liverpool 1-0 in the final, and Laurie Sanchez goal, and I remember jumping around the room in celebration, and then my mother took me to see the trophy celebration through the streets of Wimbledon. I'm not too sure if there was lines like they tend to be, say, in Liverpool when they won the Champions League or anything like that. But there was a few of us there, and the years of Dennis Wise and Vinnie Jones, and these would be great names to people who followed football, soccer back then. And as you said, their ground in Plough Lane in Wimbledon, and as I say, Wimbledon is so well known globally for its tennis, and not necessarily outside of the UK for its football, but it is now steeped in great tradition, and it's great to see AFC Wimbledon thriving and hopefully back in their home at Plough Lane once again in the stadium there. Just as importantly, Michael, I really want to dig down on what you guys are doing in the academy, because I just think it's awesome. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about the setup there? What does that look like? Does it go down to very young ages? Does it go up to under 23s? What's that landscape there, Michael?
Yes. So AFC Wimbledon are a Cat 3 academy, and in English football there were 4 categories. So Category 4 means you don't run a schoolboy section, you run an under 18s and under 23s up. So your youth really starts at under 18s. Cat 1, 2 and 3, it means you run all the way down from under 9s up to under 18s. But there's obviously criteria you need to meet for each category, and most of it being around facilities and money that you input. So us being a League One club, and obviously we're not actually an old academy, we've only been in the academy since 2011, so less than 10 years old. We're a Cat 3 academy. Other Cat 3s, to give an example, would be Southend, United, Northampton, Peterborough. Cat 2, there's not many Cat 2s in the country, but I believe Crystal Palace, but Bournemouth, and then you would have your Cat 1s. So a few examples would be like your Arsenals, your Man Cities, your Man United, all the big guns. And a lot of it is around facilities, infrastructure, and money that you can invest into the academy. So just to give an example, a Category 1 academy, you would need X amount of indoor domes and X amount of gym facilities and X amount of staff. So we're not in the position or anywhere near a position to be considered a Cat 1, but you never know in the future. But as a Cat 3, we're pretty much established, and we run age groups all the way from under 9s all the way up to under 18s. In a Cat 3, you can or you can't have an under 23s. That's completely up to the club. We don't have a 23s formally. We do have a section of boys that obviously progress from the academy, but probably aren't ready yet for first team football. So we have an ad hoc group of under 23s, which we enter into cup competitions and which we get out on loan just to make sure they get their games program. But we don't have a formal games or development program for the under 23s.
Now, West Ham, Crystal Palace, 2 big names, 2 big London clubs who are renowned for producing great players, or have been renowned for producing great players over the years. And I suppose this could be a lazy thing to say here, but they're areas of London, southeast London and east London, southeast being Crystal Palace, east London being West Ham. They're known for being what we might call great catchment areas where there's a lot of young players who are keen young footballers, areas where perhaps there are sort of facilities that allow players to play on certain estates and in small-sided games and things like that, who've come through the ranks. What's the, if you don't mind me asking, what's the catchment area like where you are? Because Wimbledon is southwest London. Is it a very exciting catchment area? Is there loads and loads of talent around there?
Yes, so just to give you a bit more understanding, an academy can only sign a player within an hour and a half of its training base. So what your Cat 1s and Cat 2s do to get around that is they offer accommodation. So, if you're Man City, for example, just use them for financial reasons, they're able to host players from all over the country in accommodation within the 1 hour and a half of their training base. So therefore they can go and recruit around the country or as they get older around Europe. So clubs like us, obviously, who haven't got the facilities or resources to be able to do that, we can recruit anyone an hour and a half from our principal training base. So if you looked at our squads, I'd say 7-8 years ago, a lot of them it was very Surrey based. A lot of boys in the Surrey area. Kingston, Esher, Surrey's a massive area. But as we've got bigger and Wimbledon's got more known, we've started to branch into London a lot more. Once you go into London, as you can imagine, there's a lot more competition. You've got Arsenal, Tottenham, West Ham, Fulham, you've got Leyton Orient, you've got Barnet. There are loads of clubs in London. So the competition increases massively. But at the same time, you do have a lot of population in London, so there are more boys to pick from. It's become a little bit more fierce. But no, at the moment, I'd say our recruitment in our squad, in the academy, I'd say it's probably 40% London based and 60%, probably more Surrey based, which isn't a problem. We are where we are, but as we're getting bigger, you do see boys from different parts of the city all of a sudden being a bit more attracted to Wimbledon. To give you a bit of example, if you went back 7-8 years ago, a boy getting released from Chelsea or an Arsenal or Cat 1 club, we would probably be down in their list in terms of an option. But as we've got bigger and the academy and the club's become more established, you find boys are selecting us over other clubs, which is a great representation of how much we've grown.
That's awesome. And I'd imagine the challenges that you face from a catchment area perspective, from a recruitment perspective, means that there is a pressure on you as a group of coaches to just be better coaches, to be creative, to be industrious in terms of how you help those players develop themselves.
Yeah, us being us, we have to be very creative and very honest with what we can or can't do. So we know we're not the best paying academy, for example, in terms of our staff. So we know a lot of staff that we recruit and hire. They're probably going to be very young down their coaching pathway, newly qualified, probably not as experienced as other coaches, and we might, for some, be a stepping stone. As much as we hate to say it, but we do have a lot of success of people coming into us, staying for a year or two, and then progressing. So we looked and said, right, so what have we got? And one thing that we've really tried to be creative with and highlight is our development program. And it's all football, but what we've decided, I wouldn't say decided to, we've evolved over time, and we've got a group of great creative minds, imaginations. We come together and we're not scared to try something and for it to fail. But we thought one way we can stand out is with our development program, which is, some of the stuff that you referred to earlier. And in terms of our size, in terms of our resources and what we will ever be able to do, especially in the short term future, we're quite honest. And we said, right, let's really highlight and be creative with our development program. And let's see if we can get any marginal gains in other areas, which might be overlooked by other clubs. We haven't got indoor facilities. We haven't got these fantastic gym facilities. But what we've got in the building is great people, who are passionate about not just player development but personal development. And one thing I've never ever heard a kid get released by Wimbledon, or or receive bad news and talk bad of the people. Of course, naturally, people feel away and there will be some emotion to it. But one thing I don't ever want to happen as academy manager, and one thing that's never happened, is people turn around and say, "Oh, Wimbledon was a bad place because X, Y, Z." So no, we pride ourselves on having a good, creative, enthusiastic coaching staff who care passionately about personal development as well as player development.
I love that, Michael. I love that notion of, yes, we're here to develop players, but we're here to develop ourselves as coaches. We want to be the best that we can be, because when we're the best that we can be, we know we're going to help our players to be the best that they can be. That feels like there's a lot of psychological safety, which is a term being used a lot at the moment. There's a lot of psychological safety within your organization. There's a lot of psychological safety to explore, to create. You allow your staff, your coaches, you give them the freedom to find alternative solutions or creative solutions to the challenges you face on a day-to-day basis. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yeah, absolutely. We want to be person first, player second, and there's a lot of transferable skills from lifestyle to football pitches. And I suppose the biggest challenge around that is educating the boys and the parents to see that, so, why are you doing this? Why are you not on the football pitch, doing tactics or something? But we're getting there. As you said, a lot of, we do highlight and we promote coaches to try something new. One thing that, as academy, you get audited every couple of years to retain your license. And part of the audit is, psychology. You need a psychology area and psychology lead, and you need, what is your psychology curriculum? And we looked at it and we said, like, well, everything psychology, everything matters. Body language, whether it's the way you enter a building. And there are a few things that people say, it's only a little thing, or oh yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And we say, no, everything matters, and the small things aren't small things. The small things are big things. So we pride ourselves on every single notion when the boy enters the training ground. How he presents himself, how he conducts himself. Coming up and shaking hands, and we try and really highlight and promote and develop the person behind the player. And we have had loads of examples of these skills then highlighting skills on the pitch. And to be fair to the boys, the most difficult thing is trying to educate the boys to see that and educate the parents. But we are now at a place where the boys do see the benefits, and they see why and how that can be transferred across. And just to go back a little bit, so I'm just waffling here a little bit about the psychology area. One thing that we say is that we as coaches, we might not be qualified psychologists, but we are all psychologists in the way that the messages that we convey and the behaviours that we promote day to day within our training sessions. It's all psychology. If I say psychology in football, a couple of the best psychologists are Jurgen Klopp, Sir Alex Ferguson. These are football coaches, but you see the impact they have on not just their players and their teams and their squads, but the fans. And there's a reason for that. And yes, they're football coaches first, and there's tactics and technical and skills and everything else. But fundamentally, they develop people. It's not a surprise they have had or are having the success they've had.
I don't think you were waffling there at all. I think that was a rich landscape, a rich description. I think that's brilliant. And maybe I'm a little bit biased, Michael, but this is the point of the Sports Psych Show, is to help coaches understand that, look, you might not be a sports psychologist per se, but you do psychology within your role. And as you said, psychology is always going on. I refer the audience back to episode number 46 with Fergus Connolly, one of the world's leading sports scientists, who says psychology is omnipresent. It's always there. and we add in the social piece. Psych-social is always there, and psych-social drives the technical, tactical, and physical sides of the game. I just want to hone in. You said something interesting there, whereby, I mean, we've had that conversation whereby I love the fact that as a leader of your organisation, you're giving your coaches psychological safety to create ideas. I love the fact that you're person before player, and then probably person, player, performer in that order. I heard you say that you have had pushback. You've had pushback from maybe players, maybe parents. If you don't mind me asking, what does that look like, that pushback? Where are people saying, well, hang on a minute, no, this is X's and O's, this is tactics? What does that look like?
Well, in the academy, we've got over 100, I think we've got about 126 boys, and with that, you've got boys of different cultures, different backgrounds, so there are, and within the, with that become, you've got over 200 parents. Within that, some boys have got more than one family, so the parents might not be together. So then, it all starts to accumulate. So not everyone is always going to see eye to eye or see what you're trying to do. So the majority obviously get it straight away. Yep, love that. I can see that. And naturally, some people, especially when if their boys are not probably like top of the group, for example, in terms of on the pitch performances, or maybe not progressing as quickly as others, they do start to question, my boy, little Jimmy needs to be out on the pitch and he needs to be working on his 1v1 skills because, there's a fear that he's going to get released. And, okay, I'm not saying that isn't relevant, but at the same time, there are other ways to try and hone in and try and develop these skills. And some of that might be classroom based, some of that might be, homework, or just different methods and different practices within sessions. So you do naturally get some people go, hold on a minute, like, what's that about? What aren't you doing next if you want to achieve Y? And we are saying, well, we are doing X to achieve Y, we're just doing it a very different way. But it's all part of it, so we only get the boys for between 5 and 7 hours a week. So their biggest influences are the parents, are the families, So when little Johnny leaves us and gets in the car with mummy and daddy, mummy and daddy are going to have something to say about the football they've just seen or not. So we said, well, whereas clubs in the past may have kept parents at arm's length, we've tried to go, no, let's try and bring them closer to us and educate them as to what we're doing and why we're doing it and why it's important, and actually how you can also accelerate certain skills and certain development by doing other stuff away from the training ground. One of them might be, don't talk about football at all and just talk about, did you enjoy yourself? Did you try your best? And then leave it as that. Don't get into the nitty gritty of football. So, we're quite early on in our program in that sense. And we've got a few meetings over the next few months to try and put it all together for next season. But, we're getting there and we're evolving. But yeah, we feel a massive part of us getting to where we want to get to is working with the parents and educating the parents. And almost, there's nothing wrong with a bit of pushback. I think if you have to, what's the word I'm looking for? If you have to prove what you're doing, and if you have to answer it, I think that's a good thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all. So we kind of encourage that. Look, if you've got any questions, if you've got any pushbacks, if you've got anything else to say, like, come on, say it. Let's have an open forum here, because we're all here ultimately for the benefit of the players and for the boys. So we do welcome that. Yeah, with parents, you've got psychologists, you've got school teachers, you've got they've got their own jobs and own backgrounds. So it's natural, but it's all part of the process.
I'm going to take your first point last, because I really, really love what you said there. I love the fact you're not closed-minded to, well, we do it this way, and parents, you've got to keep quiet and just let us get on with it. You're giving parents the space to say, well, hang on, this is how we see it, and it sounds to me like you see that as a positive thing. It sounds to me like you see that as a way to grow yourself. We as coaches have to explain to you, the parent, why we're doing it this way. You've got to sell your why, and when you sell your why, in many respects, you become more knowledgeable yourself as a coach, don't you?
Absolutely. Justify is the word I was thinking about. But no, yeah, if you saw your why, it does make you think. And I know you had Mark Bennett on a previous episode, and I went to one of his events with other coaches, and one thing he said, you don't learn from experience, you learn from reflecting from experience. And so pushbacks and people coming back with questions and forcing you to justify what you do, but it makes you reflect. It makes you think, well, hold on a minute, are we doing that right? Have they got a point? So it kind of just strengthens why you're doing it, and makes you better.
Absolutely. It's feeling comfortable in that uncomfortable shade of grey, rather than just seeing things as black and white, because we're so comfortable in black and white. Well, this is the way it is. This is the way it is. And it sounds to me, reflecting on what you've said as well, going back to your coaching piece, that sounds similar to your coaching philosophy, because if a player has a poor first touch, you're not quick to jump on the bandwagon of, well, we've got to go and get 1,000 touches. And as you've said, that might be the case, right? But it's, well, stop, hold on. It sounds to me at AFC Wimbledon Academy, you guys are engaged in a couple of questions, which is, well, how do we help our people engage and learn? And how do we help parents to help their child engage and learn?
Absolutely. The player and the person has to be at the core of it all. And I'm not sitting here saying it's all me. I've evolved as a coach. But when I first started coaching at Wimbledon, I was very fortunate to work under Mark Robinson, he's now a first team coach at the club. But we worked together for years, and we kind of knew what we would do. We were kind of doing the person developments first, but we kind of had no structure. We kind of we weren't too sure what we were doing. Then we went on to we went to the Mark Bennett conference, which was really interesting, and he helped us quantify a little bit more what it is we're looking at and what it is we're seeing. And the AYA, I'm not sure if you heard of the FA coaching badge called the AYA, but it's really enabled you to structure and to process, and we'll put a process in place more of what you're trying to do, and it made a lot more sense. So when I speak to you, Dan, it's not just, we've got Mark Robinson, who's a very forward-thinking, innovative coach. We've got Rob Tuvey, who's an under-18s coach, and everyone's different in their own characters, and they do it their own way, but and their methods might look slightly different, but the outcome and the purpose is always the person first. We've got Daniela Usu. She's recently come on board she's a psychologist consultant. So she works with GP hockey and a few other sports, which again, it's brilliant having a fresh pair of eyes and a fresh mindset on things. And she more consults and bounces off ideas off rather than gets into the nitty gritty of football. Football's just the sport. And we've got two-phase coaches who I believe you might have saw yesterday at another football conference called Jack Matthews and James Oliver Pierce, who they come up with some stuff sometimes and you can kind of almost see something about to fail, but you're like, no, go on, run with it and see how you feel. But we're all very creative and imaginative in our own little ways, and through that comes a lot of good stuff, and we promote that. But sorry, just to go back a little bit, so where this all kind of come from is myself and Mark Robinson went to the Mark Bennett event, and he's massive in basketball, and managing behaviours and stuff like that. And we come away and we said, well, how can we take his methods and his messages to football? Because he has certain methods that he does at basketball, like stopping the practice and and then the players bring themselves in and give themselves team talks and key points and stuff. But football's a lot more transitional. It's a lot more high tempo. You can't stop an attack. If you do, the attack won't look like the attack when you restart it. So he said, well, how can we do what we do here? Taking the sport away. So there's a few things that we've introduced. So one being, if there is a practice, as an example, the boys can stop it at any point if the practice isn't hitting the standards that we set. So if communication not loud enough, if energy levels ain't good enough, or if poor technique is done through laziness rather than a mistake, the boys stop it, and we try and get them to coach themselves. We might, if there's a player who needs to work on communication or who needs to work on awareness, we might make him the captain for the day, so he's the only one that can stop a practice, or he might have to organise whatever. So we really try and hone in on what do the players need, What are his strengths, what are his weaknesses? But at the core of it all is always the player. It's not coach, it's player. For different players, it looks different. But what we have found is once you give a player confidence in something, it transfers to the pitch. Once he's walking around with his back straight and shoulders up and head held high, all of a sudden, his energy, his performance goes up, and it transfers to the pitch.
I'm trying to unpack that there because there's just so much rich stuff. Let's start with the players can stop it. That would be, I know to many coaches, it would be, I don't know, without sounding over the top, a shocking statement. What, your players can stop this? Why, Michael? Why did you introduce that? How have you introduced that? What does that look like? What do you mean?
So, one thing we say we should never speak about is energy levels, is attitude, is work rate. And we say to the players, those are the things you need to come to us with. And we cannot coach you that, and we can't talk to you about that. That is something you need to come to the table with. And we can, and it's our job as knowledgeable, experienced coaches to add on the tactical stuff and the bits on top. So once we've got the players to buy in to say, yes, that's our side of the bargain, or that is what we can do. We then said, right, we're going to do a practice, so it could be a passing drill, and at any point, little Jack, you're in charge of today. You stop the practice, or any boy, you can stop the practice at any point. And how that looked at first is no one was stopping the practice, as you can imagine. So there's a few times you have to stop it and goes like, boys, come on, what did you just see there? Was that a poor pass? Yeah, it was a poor pass. Why was it a poor pass? Oh, because he wasn't concentrating. Right, okay, so he's not concentrating, so he's not doing what he said he should do. Or maybe he plays the ball, but there's no communication behind it. Or maybe he's meant to run, but he jogs. So we're saying, right. So the first few times you had to stop it and go, right, boys, can you see that? Can you identify that? Right. And then bit by bit, the boys just started to grasp it and started to take ownership. Now, naturally, some boys, they don't want to pull up their own teammates and go, Dan, you wasn't working hard enough. So there is still a little bit of work to do, and there will always be work to do. We will never get to where we want to get to. But it looks a lot different now than what it did when we first started. And you referred to before, you referred to before about the player-led game that you saw, the under-13s player-led game. You can't just turn up one day and go, boys, you're going to take your own game tomorrow. Because then, which has happened, and, there's a lot of chaos, and within that there's a lot of good stuff. But it's about putting a building block in place. And the way we got to it was by implementing this. Right, at first, boys, you're going to be able to stop practices, and you're going to be able to, restructure it or coach your teammates or whatever it is. And what we're going to build towards is, it might look like 10 minutes session 1, but by session 5, it might be half an hour. Okay, and in 6 weeks' time, we want you to be taking the whole session, and you're designing your own session. And right, you've got a game in 2 months' time. We're going to look for you to take it yourselves. Are you comfortable with that? Yes or no? Okay, if you're not comfortable with that, well, then what game would you be happy to take? Or if you are comfortable with that, how can we get there? And it was about putting building blocks in place. And still some boys, different age groups, different backgrounds, different culture and stuff. There is still a lot of work to be done, but that's why the players are the players. That's why some boys are further ahead than others in that, but it's all part of it.
What I hear is that you're tapering controlled coaching down towards autonomy supportive, or up towards autonomy supportive coaching. It's that tapering process whereby if it was 100% controlled coaching, we the coaches are in charge. This is coach led. You do what we say. You've set a goal and objective. You've had a vision of being far more player-led, which is a term bandied around that is often misused and misabused, but you guys aren't doing that. You're doing a great job of working towards as much autonomy supportive coaching as possible, as in it's player-led. The players are driving this. But as you're saying, you don't start that at 100%. You start that at 5%, at 10%. You drip feed and you build and you build and you build and you build. Would I be correct in saying that?
Absolutely. I wouldn't say we're a player-led program. I'd say we're player-centered, or we're trying to move towards a player-centered program. Whereas within that, within the other, there are certain age groups who are more player-led than others. So, for example, the under nines, tens, 11s, that is very player-centered. But our aim is, as you move through the age groups, they become more player-led. Um, we as coaches, we're there to help you tactically and technically and stuff, but we're there to also make sure you understand, there are fundamentals, not to sport, but to life, which is like work rate, commitment, energy, communication, and these are transferable. So, but an under nine isn't going to get that. So, I wouldn't say we're a player-led program. I'd say we're a player-centered. And there's still a lot of work to be done in the age groups, and there is still a lot of work to be done with the coaches. We recruit and hire coaches who are young in their coaching pathway, or they might have been at other clubs for years, and this is completely new to them. So, just an easy method that we put to all our coaches is player first, player last. So, when you're talking to the boys, make sure they open it up with their thoughts and make sure they come to the forum. As a coach, you might sprinkle on your little bit, but then make sure you close it with players last, and they know what's expected of them, and they kind of set their own objectives to go back out and to perform. And I know that's quite a simple way of doing it, but that's probably the first step of introducing this method to coaches. And just to give you an example, so the player-led stuff. So I'll be lying if I said it was my idea. It wasn't my idea. Mark Robinson came to me one day and he said, "Mike, I've got this idea." This was the under-18s. So the video you saw, it got a bit of attention and stuff, but we done our first game about a year and a half prior to that, and it was with the under-18s. And Mark Robinson sat down to me. He said, "Mike, I've got an idea. I'm going to work towards a player-led game." So I said, "Okay, what does that look like?" And we kind of unpacked it. And he said, "What's your thoughts?" And I said, "Wow." My first thought was, "Wow." Like, my brain went fuzzy and said, "Wow." But at the same time, well, these boys are on the fringes of the first team. You will have first team staff asking questions like, "Well, what are you doing? That's not what we do here." If the boys win 7-0, what are the outcomes? How are you going to deal with slight little egos that might be developed? And, when you're trying to, if you lose a game and then they go and win 7-0, all of a sudden, do they walk around thinking they know more than you? What if they lose 7-0? And what if they have a bad performance and it all goes pear-shaped, and then, people from the outside, parents and club staff are looking, going, "Well, what are you doing?" So we started to unpack it, and you kind of just got to be ballsy and do it. So we started to unpack it, and we looked at all the things that may or may not happen. And as I said, the boys worked towards it, with it just starting off with, "Right, boys, you can intervene and stop a session now," to, "Right, boys, in week 4 or 5, you're going to now be taking your own sessions, and you're going to be presenting to us the game plan, and you're going to be presenting to us all the problems that may occur and who's going to do what." And the under-18s done it 2 times before the under-13s video came out, and the Nuggets in that, they went 2-0 down, and the boys tactically changed the game and obviously had to mix up and stuff, and they got a last-minute equaliser, so they drew 2-2, so it almost felt like a win. And as you can imagine, the boys, they were buzzing, and it went from them being a little bit apprehensive from doing the first game to, "Right, when we're going to do the second, can we do 3? Can we do 4? But the best thing for us was some of the boys were meeting at the venue, so it's an away game. So they're meeting at it was Leyton Orient. So some of the boys were meeting at Leyton Orient, and some of the boys were on the coach travelling, and the coach took a wrong turn and almost got stuck down a small road. So it delayed the coach getting to the venue, and obviously the boys had jobs to do. Right, you're going to do water, you're going to do balls, you're going to set up the warm up, right. So the coach getting to the venue late affected the whole schedule. And what the boys did, and it's very simple, and the boys probably didn't even notice it at the time, but it's like a little light bulb went for us, is the boys on the coach started ringing the boys at the facility saying, "Right, we're going to be 10 minutes late. Dan, you got to do this. Michael, you got to do that. Michael's not going to be able to do that. So Joey, you got to do that." And they started organising themselves. In part of the review and reflection of the experience, we said, "Boys, be honest, what would you have done if the coaches were on the coach?" And they said, "We would have left it," and we said, "We would have left you guys to do it." And we said, "Right, if we, imagine you could be the best you could be. Imagine you could just forward think all the time. Imagine you could just take ownership and if something was going wrong, you communicated that. Imagine you took full responsibility for those things. Plus, on top of that, we as coaches could add on what we've done. Imagine where we can get to. And the boys, they started to get it. And so the under 13s, if I'm honest, they've got a fantastic coach who came into us, and I don't mind mentioning his name, is Andy Parslow, and he's a highly thought of youth coach in the academy. But he came from other clubs, and he came very much, he admits himself, but very much coach centered almost. Like, if my team's performing bad, or if my team doesn't get the result it should get, it's a reflection on me. And so there's a lot of work to be done with him as well as the players. But it's quite exciting because, if we felt, well, if we can get through a character like Andy, who, he's very, very, very knowledgeable, highly experienced and very thought-provoking. But if we can get through a coach like Andy and get him to see the benefits of, then that's better for everyone. So there's a lot of work to be done by there. And even now, he's completely changed his outlook on player development. And it was actually his team, and I was standing beside him whilst the game was going on. So just to give you a bit of context, when on the 13's game, they're playing in a 4G pitch with a fence around it, and the only staff members allowed around the boys were physios, just to make sure the boys were safe. And obviously before the game, you contact the opposition and say, right, this is what we're looking to do. It's not disrespectful, but we need you to almost agree to it as much as us saying to you we're going to do it. So they did agree to it. So myself, Andy, and the phase coach James were standing outside watching. And the videos you saw, because it was complete player led, the videos you saw were actually videos taken by players who were injured, just to make sure it's completely player led. And Andy, how are you feeling watching this? And he goes, yeah, no, I'm really proud. And the boys are doing well. Things were going wrong. Boys were putting other boys. They're conducting their own team talks. They're making subs. And he almost like had a tear in his eye at the end, going like, wow, I can't believe these are my boys. And he was really proud. And that's what it's about. And I think the most powerful bit is when the boys interviewed themselves afterwards and said what they took away from the event and how they felt about it. And if you go back to when someone first picks up a ball, or someone first plays football, it's basically ball in your hand, you put it on the floor, you just run with it, and then someone comes and tries to tackle you, and all of a sudden there's 2, 3, 4, 5 and all of a sudden you're playing football. There's no coach. It's just basically just like little kids running around playing football. And that's football probably at its most organic state. And you go back years ago and people talk about football used to be played on the streets, and it'd be like 20 versus 20, or 10 versus 5, or whatever it is. And the only times boys go in is when they want to eat, and they go back out and play football all day long. And that's probably football in its most organic state. And we look and go, well, were boys developing then? Were there any risk involved? Well, of course they were, but they managed it. They didn't need bibs, and they didn't need structure, and they didn't need a coach stopping and stuff. They managed themselves. And we kind of looked and said, well, how do we, I wouldn't say get back to that state completely, but how do we take those raw ingredients out and make sure the boys of today don't lose that, whilst at the same time working with and what we now have, which is better facilities and better knowledgeable coaches. How do we combine it all? So yeah, even some of our practices now, we do a thing on a Monday. The foundation phase do it on a Monday. So Jack Matthews oversees this as lead foundation phase. And part of the practice is, right, boys, there's an area, there's goals, there's a ball, sort yourself out. And we haven't videoed it yet, and it's still at its very early stages. But you do see, they put on different conditions of how a goal can be scored, or if the game becomes unrealistic, they start moving players about, and it's just basically football. It's like rawest, most organic state. It's our example of street football, and I think, with academies and with development programs and stuff, we've evolved, and we've got more than we've ever had, but in a kind of way we're doing less than what we ever did, if that kind of makes sense. Or we definitely felt like there there were things that we had back in the day that we no longer have, and those are the things that we said, right, how can we bring those back to the forum? How can we, bring those skills and those things that we may have lost in the past or may have been more heightened in the past? How can we make sure boys of today don't lose that? I've waffled on again, Dan. Sorry, you got me going.
It's far from waffle. It's the other way around, mate. I think in the year and a half we've done the Sports Site Show, I think that's been my favourite narrative, honestly. And I think if I'm pausing here, there's so many different directions I can take this, and so many questions I've got for you, and so many points to make. I think it's almost overwhelming in terms of where one can go here, because I think the 4 or 5 minutes that you've spoken there contain so many important coaching lessons and philosophies and strategies, modern day. I think where I would like to take this, I think the first thing to say is actually going all the way back to the beginning of what you were saying. I'd like to say thank you, because I think that you pulled me up on something here, a mistake I make, in as much as I use player-led and player-centered interchangeably when I shouldn't. So I learned lots from this podcast, and I'll learn loads from today, but that's a very important learning thing for me, to not use those two, because as you say, they are different. You're player-centered, driving towards player-led. I love that. Thank you. I want to make a point about energy and attitude at some point in the next 10 or so minutes, because I actually want to challenge you on something. And it's a positive challenge, but I'm going to challenge you in a positive way there. So remind me to come back to that. What I want to ask, I think the under-18 story, the under-18s going and brainstorming because they're late, and then driving everything and coming back from 2-0 down to 2-2 is just, if people aren't listening to that, if coaches aren't listening to that and going, how can we do this? How can we, this is so imperative for young people of that age to be able to do that, is so impactful. And how can we continue to do that through under 21s, under 23s, into first team level? Why more first teams don't do that kind of thing belies belief, but that's me, and I'm biased, and I understand that. Going back to your under 13s, I think it's an interesting landscape, and I understand that tension, because would I be right in thinking the tension here is, how do we continue to help them go from player-centered to player-led, where they're growing as people and as players as well, because they're students of the game and students of their game. But also in my mind, I've got, as a coach, we still understand that every sport has its principles. There are principles of play. So would I be right in thinking the tension here lies between helping players go from player-centered to player-led, whilst also helping them grow and understand, or learn is the best word here, the principles of play within football?
Yes. And as an academy, we have our principles of play, which our coaching philosophy is built around. But all I would say is, even without the principles, say if you had no principles but played football, principles would still be present. So one team would be in possession, one team would be out of position, one team would have just lost it or just won it, and so counter attack is on. So without even structuring it or labouring it, it's present. But absolutely, yes, we do talk about tactics. We do change formations for the benefits of individuals. So just to give an example, a few years ago, 4-3-3 was pretty much the dominant formation. As we've evolved as an academy, we've made mistakes, and we've reflected and said, well, hold on a minute, what were we doing, or what are we doing? And we were pretty much a 4-3-3 based academy. But then what we saw was that we were producing a lot of strikers and a lot of forwards who struggled to play with another forward. Or you have a centre back who progresses through the pathway and then gets to 15, 16, 18, who all of a sudden you realise his weakness might be defending his own goal, whilst running back towards his own goal. So why is that? Well, that's because in the 4-3-3, a forward plays on his own, and he has two wide players alongside him, so he's pretty much up there on his own, and he's not used to playing with another forward or a defender. How comes all of a sudden when he's running back towards his own goal, he looks a little bit slow, or a little bit slow paced? Well, that's because in the 4-3-3, he's got a fullback beside him and a centre back beside him, so he's got a bit of protection. So we do play with formations and different tactics, and sometimes we set boys up to lose, especially with younger boys, for example. So if it's a 5v5 or 6v5, why do you need a defender marking an attacker? Why not get the goalkeeper to mark the attacker and get the defender high up the pitch? Well, what are the benefits of that? Well, if the ball gets played over the top, the goalkeeper's now got to work on his 1v1 defending, which now applies to, if he's, if you look at Edison and Allison in the Premiership now, they're very good with their feet. They're very good at sweeping up and coming out their box. So, there are long-term benefits there, but short-term, it might not look like that. So we do set boys up to fail, and we do manipulate the principles a little bit for outcomes. 100%, definitely.
Let me take you up on your principles are always present. Great piece of alliteration as well, mate. Yeah. I love that. Principles are always present. Yes, they're always present, and as I say, I love that. And there's always in possession, out of possession, transition. You'd be more of an expert on that than me. So principles are always present, but players aren't always attending to what could be construed as the right things or the optimal things for themselves. So I suppose, and I'm thinking out loud here, I'm thinking about, again, this tension between controlled coaching and autonomy supportive, player-centered, driving towards player-led, is that surely a part of this then is, if principles are always present, we have to help players educate their attention, what they're placing their attention on, what they're attending to, in order to help them find their optimal solutions at any given time, which ultimately, space, ball, player, the relationship between the three, where do I place my attention? And subsequently, players then make decisions based on that. So is it about educating attention within those principles of play?
Yes. So if you went, I suppose, if you went through the formal way of the traditional way of how coaches are developed, especially in the football and the FA UEFA coaching badges, stop, stand still, bang, bang, bang. You could use that method, stop, stand still, but then get the players to then start coaching the phase, which is something we do. So, if I see a problem, someone's not recovering, or someone's not pressing to the ball, or, maybe someone's showing the opposition into an area that might lead the opposition to have more success. So, right, stop boys, right, stop, Andy, or little Andy, what are you doing? Right, okay, I've pressed the ball. Okay, but where are you showing him? I'm showing him outside, yeah, but if you show him out, what does the pitch look like? Oh, he now has another option. Okay, so now 2v1 overloaded, right? Yeah. Okay, so what might happen? Okay, so what if you showed him the other way? And all of a sudden, if you kept to the same method but changed the way, made it player centered and not coach centered, I think you can start educating and getting the boys to understand and be more attentive to the situation, and we've done it before, and trust me, there are boys who they don't sometimes see it the way you see it, which is not a problem, but then that is just where they are in that way. And it's not to say they're wrong, actually. Every situation is different, and we do highlight that to the boys. The bad thing in football, I suppose, especially in the performance section, is you're right when you win, you're wrong when you lose, and we don't always say that to the boys, but sometimes they might see things a little bit differently. Not a problem. So then it's just about working with them to see, well, what potential outcomes can be done by doing it the way you think it should be done or could be done. That's difficult because pitches change all the time in football, especially high up the leagues you go. The players are quicker, they're sharper, and the time you have to make decisions decreases massively. So adapting is a massive thing. If you look at Liverpool, I think if you had to explain or quantify, what is Liverpool's style. One thing they're very good at is they're very good at adapting to the opposition. They press higher, they can drop off, or they can play, they can go in behind, they can go short. They kind of got so many solutions to the problems. So we do say to the boys, you're not wrong. However, if you're gonna do things this way, come on, how can we load it so that we have a bit of success? One thing I think in football, there's loads of gimmicks and bits and pieces that enter sports or into football. If you do this, it increases performance, or if you do that. But one thing I think that is really important, and it's probably something we don't do enough, and it's in our plans to try and increase it, is video analysis. Because the camera doesn't lie. So stop the footage. Right, boys, what you seeing? What's happening? Okay, so what are you thinking here, little Jimmy? Right, okay, but what's Michael doing? And what's Michael not doing? Michael, what do you? And then if you can start freezing pictures and getting the boys to coach themselves and looking at the actual situation there and then, I think you can get boys to start recognizing problems and potential solutions better. I have that privilege, and I understand not every coach and every development program has that resource. And it's something we don't do well enough. I've waffled again. But to answer your question, no, yes, you are right. There is a lot of things you can do to make the boys more attentive and recognise problems and situations more, and potential solutions around that.
Well, again, my interpretation of what you've said there is when you're in that development stage, which I suppose players always are, but when you're trying to help players develop their game in what I would call a progress phase, when you're on that training pitch, in terms of being player centered and driving towards player led, you're asking rather than instructing. You've said you'll stop playing and you might ask an open question. What did you see there that made you make that decision? What did you see your opposition do? And you're asking open questions for the player to explore. And it might be a scenario where you won't necessarily provide instruction. You're just appreciating what a player sees and an interpretation of what they're seeing. Whereas maybe you take it to a performance on the pitch, a performance phase, say in a match, then as a coach you may choose to be a bit more instructional. You might still ask the open question, but you might say, well, you might be a bit more directive with your question, a little bit more convergent maybe, where you've got the answer in your mind. You might ask that question, well, what is it that's going to create success here? But just a little bit more, come on, we're trying to be successful rather than being explorative, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, some boys actually do prefer being told what to do and how to do it. Some boys do perform better like that. And you go back to players. It's about recognising your players. And of course, you've got to take things into consideration. The conditions, the age group you're working with. Because if you just keep asking open-ended questions, you could be there for quite a period of time if they're not getting the answers right. They could be so far off. So I think that's the skill of the coach in recognising what and how is relevant at the time. But some players do ultimately react better to being told or being guided a little bit more. So no, you're 100% right, but I think that's the skill of the coach to recognise, who needs what and when.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking of context and individual difference. The context matters. I think that's almost the overarching thing in coaching. What is my context? What is your context? Yeah. And then individual differences. As we like to say in football, soccer, know your players. And I just want to emphasise at this point to everybody listening in, obviously we're talking about a team, we're using football and soccer because Michael is a soccer coach, but this is relevant for, I would say, for all sports, but certainly team invasion sports. Absolutely. I'd like the last couple of minutes, mate. I'd just like to close on this this positive challenge I want to give to you, if that's okay. Get your permission.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
it's something you said earlier about coaching energy and attitude, and I would actually see this almost as slightly paradoxical here, in as much as you saying to players, and again, the context here is the way in which you coach and the open and creative manner and the player-centered and then player-led way in which you coach, I think gives you permission to say, I humbly think this, gives you permission to say to your people who turn up, the young people who turn up for training, to say, you've got to bring energy, you've got to bring attitude to the pitch. And you say, because that can't be coached. I think that's one thing to communicate to them if you go through the processes and practices that you do. Because I would say to you, you are coaching them energy and you are coaching them attitude. In what way? Because you're player-centered. Because you're asking them to be in, their involvement is turning up the volume of energy. Their involvement is turning up the volume, or building their attitude, if you like. If they weren't involved and you were simply coach-led, and this is my big beef in the coaching world, is that too often we'll say, well, you can control your energy, effort and attitude, and you've got to turn up with this, and then we're coach-led. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. That's not useful here. That is not, in my humble opinion, that is not a true statement that we cannot coach energy, attitude and effort. We can. To me, mate, you're doing that. And I know you wouldn't vocalize this to your players. I understand why you're saying what you're saying to your players. For me, from what you're saying, you do that. You do coach energy, effort and attitude because you are player-centered. Because you are driving towards player-led. Would you think that that's a fair thing to say?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you pulled me up on it. Absolutely, and we try and do a lot of work with boys of understanding, the perception of body language, or the perception of a word, for example. But as you say, that's not that is part of a program. One thing we do as coaches is if a player's late to a session, you don't say, Michael, why are you late? Not good enough, bang, bang, because you have no idea of what I've been through, so I could have been driving, my mum and dad could have been driving me from training from one part of London to the other. I've been in a few car crashes, had a very just unfortunate circumstances and series of events, and I've managed to get to training 10 minutes late. Whereas someone else who might be walking around the corner leaves their house at, 5 to 6 to be there at 2 to 6 and is deemed as early. So we're massive on, if a player, once a player gets to training, if he's late, you don't talk about lateness. As an example, you say, right, well done for getting here. Come on, let's get ready now. Go and put your boots on, and bang, let's get out there. However, if you have a water break and you say, boys, be back in a minute, and he's back in 2 minutes, then you can say, no, that's not good enough. That's not discipline. That's not what we agreed here. So you do need to understand the situation and have a bit more context around what it is you're referring to. So yes, you're 100% right. We do a lot with boys understanding the power of language or body language or their energy that they bring, but that's not on day one. I don't think we'll ever get there. We're aiming for perfect, and perfect exists in our mind, but I've never seen it present. But it's something you're always going to try and work towards. But no, I'm glad you pulled me up on that because you're 100% right.
No, well, mate, I mean, I just love your answer there. And you're quite right in terms of perfection. I mean, we're human beings, and human beings are complex systems, and I think even striving towards perfectionism, I'm not too sure about that. I think striving towards excellence and self-management, it's as simple as that, because no matter, every single personality characteristic that we all possess has its pros and cons, its advantages, its disadvantages, its strengths and weaknesses. Somebody, for instance, who is, say, highly conscientious and turns up on time all the time and does everything right. There are downsides to that side of certain sides of their personality with that respect. So every single somebody who is, people talk about having the value of humility. Well, that's great and that's very nice, but sometimes humility doesn't serve you well. Sometimes the value of, or the characteristic of, determination, brilliant, fantastic, and that helps people succeed. But sometimes determination can overspill into burnout and tiredness, and rest and recuperation is important as well. So I think we're not perfect, and we have to recognize that. And last thing to say here, I love what you've said. You've differentiated between that notion of lateness, which there could be so many reasons why somebody is late, for instance, and then you differentiated it to say getting some water and having a minute's break. There are some boundaries there, and people are in the environment. There's very few reasons why somebody can't get back within a minute. And I love that differentiation there, mate. That's awesome.
Can I see an example?
Yeah, please.
No, sorry, no. So just to highlight. So we've got a boy who he travels from Tottenham, so North London, all the way across to us, which we're based in Surrey, New Malden. And he was late a few times, and the coach did say, "Oh, Mike, I really question his attitude. I really question how much he wants it. He's always late, and he turns up not in a rush, and bags hanging off his back and stuff like that." And I said, "Well, how can you question a boy that travels 2.5-3 hours a journey to get to training, plus the 1.5 2 hours back? So you're talking about his travel time's a hell of a lot longer than his training time." I said, "Is that not determination to you? Is that not someone who wants it?" And wow, yeah, I didn't look at it like that. I said, the reason he's getting late is because that journey is horrendous, and his parents and himself, they're doing everything they can to get out of school. Probably not eating or hydrating properly because he's in the car and bang. But I said, you need a bit more context of the situation, because little Johnny, who lives around the corner and he can probably walk to training, is someone who you deem as wanting it and deem as having a great attitude. But for all he could be on his leave school, be on his computer from when he leaves school to 5:45, leave his house at 5:50, be at training for 5 to 6, and he's 5 minutes early. Oh yeah, he really wants it. But for the last two and a bit hours, he's been on his computer, not really focusing on his session or focusing on where he wants to get to. And that's just an example of, but you do need to understand the player and their journey and their background a little bit more before you make a conclusion of what it is you think you're seeing, because sometimes what you're seeing isn't always correct.
And I love what you've said there, because you've changed the narrative of this other coach. You've helped that other coach see things from a different perspective. Rather than it being poor attitude, it's actually a mark of determination. And I can assure the listeners, if you live in London, that getting from Tottenham to the Wimbledon area or the Kingston area is a hell of a schlep. And just last thing to say, because I'm very mindful of your time, and this has been a great conversation, but I do want to say this, actually, the kind of thing we're talking about here, the appreciation of individual differences, personality characteristics, people's circumstances is very, very important, because I get a lot of, say, head coaches, and I'm possibly talking more about the adult elite level, so first team level adults, where managers and head coaches talk a lot about the importance of team cohesion, and if they allow this player off here and they allow this player off there, and if they don't stick to strict guidelines here and strict guidelines there, well, I can't be doing that, Dan, because then the other players will think this, that and the other, and then it will be anarchy. Actually, can we look at that slightly differently? Actually, what is great teamship? Isn't great teamship an understanding of the circumstances of your teammates and empathy of the circumstances of your teammates? Isn't great teamship an understanding of the personality characteristics of your teammates, and the challenges that they specifically face? So I'll get your last comment on that. I don't know what you think of that, but I just think sometimes, yes, we need structure as human beings. Yes, we need guidelines and rules, and what we probably want, autonomy supportive here, is our players, our people, to set those guidelines, those rules, those structures. And yes, we want them to be adhered to as much as possible. I get that that's great teamship, but I also would say the converse is true. The opposite is true. That actually, when we appreciate individual differences, that's also great teamship as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself. When you're dealing with young children, or it's they might not be aware of it, so we do have a responsibility to raise their awareness of it might be different backgrounds or different circumstances. But you're right. Ultimate teamship is recognizing and appreciate the value of what everyone brings to the team. Absolutely.
Yeah. Michael, what a conversation this has been. It's been one of my favourites. It's been awesome. And I love what you're doing there. I really, really do. And you haven't moaned and groaned about resources and hey, maybe you do, we all do, right? But, you guys are getting on and you're doing great things there. That's awesome. And I know that would have tapped the interest of the Sports Psych Show audience. So how can people follow you? Are you on social media? Are you on Twitter? Would you care to share your Twitter handle with people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's at Michael Hamilton, or it might be at Mike Hamilton. I can't remember. One's my Instagram, one's my Twitter. At Michael Hamilton or at Mike Hamilton _14. And there's obviously at AFC Wimbledon Academy, also on Twitter. And if anyone ever wants to get in contact and maybe potentially come and visit us and have a sit down and see what we do live and in reality, then I'm more than open to that. Our doors are always open and we can all learn off each other.
That's awesome. And just to confirm, on Twitter, it's at Mike Hamilton _14. So that's
thank you, Ben. Thank you.
No problem. I've got it in front of me. I'm not an expert. I'm not stalking you, Michael. So I'm not. I haven't got that off by heart or anything. All right, brilliant, Michael. Thanks so much for your time.
Dan, thank you so much.
Wow, everyone. Wasn't that just fantastic? Such rich information and challenging all our beliefs and assumptions about how coaching is done. I really, really enjoyed listening to what Michael had to say, listening to his ideas, his creativity within an environment that's challenging. And if you did enjoy that podcast, then I'd love to hear what you've got to say. And even if you didn't enjoy it, please do let me know. If you do have any suggestions, please do get in contact. You can do so via Twitter on my handle at DanAbraham77 or on my Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com. And you can tell me exactly what you think. And hey, look, if you do have any suggestions for future episodes, I'd be delighted to hear them. Well, I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. For now, goodbye.